California is under attack. The aggressor? Tremendous fires that still burn all over the state. According to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, or CAL FIRE, there have been over 1,700 fires this year. Media and their audiences follow the flames. However, in places like the Santa Cruz Mountains, where the flames of the summit fire have been squashed for over a month, there are still some hot spots that remain under the radar. I'm not just talking about literal hot spots where the smoke still emerges from the scorched earth. The aftermath of these fires has been just as tragic as the initial burns. In Santa Cruz County, those who lost the houses in the summit fire are now desperately sorting through their lives and deciding how they will rebuild. Literally. I spoke with Bill and Georgia Hammond, who lost the cabin they built by hand, which was supposed to be a retirement home. Although they still have their primary residence still in the Santa Cruz Mountains, the enormity of their loss is undeniable. The summit fire started on May 22nd this summer along Summit Road. This mountain road, as it winds through the beautiful sun-filtering forests, changes its name a couple of times before becoming Mount Madonna Road, at the location of the fire. At the top of a mountain ridge, you can see all the way from Monterey to the Santa Cruz Boardwalk and beyond. The rolling hills, now black with ash and studded with burnt tree trunks, contains Ormsby Road and Corralitos, also affected by the fire. Overall, the summit fire burned 4,270 acres until being 100% contained on May 28th. The Hammonds were in Greece when the fire started. They heard about the fire from a family member via email and then confirmed that they had lost their cabin by calling a neighbor. Later, they would discover just how destructive this fire was.
It was not a normal fire that comes across burning vertical and pushing horizontal. This thing came across the ridge totally horizontal, and the flames were running 60 to 65 feet at least in front of the fuel. So, it was kind of like standing back from this place with a tremendous blowtorch.
I spoke with Bill and Georgia on their property on the 4th of July, in awe of the destruction. Georgia mentioned she had never really known the topography of the hills until all the brush burned away. Staring down at the ash, it was hard for me to imagine the memories and laughter that stood out so vividly in the Hammonds' minds.
I loved going up there. I spent a lot of time there. Probably more than half our time was spent up there.
Felt very proud of it, that this was something that every nail in it we drove.
It was a fun place to take friends and my adult kids. The last party we had there was my son's 29th birthday party in February. It was really a cold, windy, foggy day. That's another thing I loved about it up there, is you could just see changes. I mean, it could be sunny, it could change to being windy. You could see the fog down below, and you could be above the fog line. You had great views at times. It just changed, and I just loved that change.
The house no longer stands, and only scraps of twisted and melted metal remain.
It's just amazing that it's no longer there. I feel just some tremendous sadness, especially when we first went there, going through the stuff on the ground that had burnt. I think right now, I'm kind of going through a grieving process. I think initially it was more like, well, I'm glad we're alive when we weren't there. More of a shock and disbelief, and now I think the reality has really set in, and it's gone. That cabin is gone, and my fear is, will we ever be able to get something like that back?
The next stage of the process is to determine whether or not they will be able to regain what they have lost. All of the residents legally must work with the Planning Department of Santa Cruz County to determine how and if they can rebuild. I spoke with the department's principal planner, John Schlahek, to find out the legal requirements and what the Board of Supervisors had ultimately decided regarding the victims of the Summit Fire. On June 17th, the board reviewed a letter of planning submitted by the director of the Planning Department, Tom Burns. In particular, the letter provided recommendations for working with both residents who had lost their legal homes and those who had lost unpermitted structures. On July 10th, Schlahek informed me that only 40% of the structures burned were permitted, The Hammonds were one of the many families who had not acquired a permit to build. As a general contractor, Bill used his professional knowledge to build the house to code and make it as fire-safe as possible. After reviewing the planning letter on June 17th, the board decided to give some allowances to all fire victims. Everyone affected by the fire would receive priority processing. Under normal circumstances, applications are reviewed in the order received. The board placed a $5,000 cap on permit fees for residents with previously legal structures. Then there was another meeting on June 26th. Schlahik explained that the $5,000 cap disproportionately favored those with bigger homes. How so? The permit fees partially depend on square footage. The larger the house, the more money you would be saving with the cap. Overruling the cap, the board would settle on a 60% reduction in application review fees. This financial support still only applies to people who had built legally in the first place. Bill and Georgia will still have to pay the full application fee, although the board has granted them priority processing.
Whatever they do, is as helpful as it is, it's not going to bring it back. Eventually the vegetation will, I think, come back, but I don't think the cab is going to grow from the ground, unfortunately.
The full price of an application could come out to over $30,000 with all of the tests, approval of wells and soil and road access and such. This price does not include the money paid to individual contractors to actually complete the work of, say, digging the wells or hauling the equipment. To start this long process, Schlahik encourages residents to go through a pre-development site review, or a PDSR, to determine whether or not the land is even buildable. Schlahik expressed a sincere desire to help victims move through the process smoothly and described the application as a necessary step that makes life better for everyone. After everything she has been through, Georgia finds the binder of papers listing requirement after requirement frustrating.
Anybody that doesn't have that level of expertise is kind of, I think, going to be in the same boat as I am. Like, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming. When I asked them whether there's going to be any priority to the fire victims, the person we were speaking with there at the planning department laughed and said, no, this is going to be about a 3 or 4 year process. A traumatic event of any sort, one of the healing aspects is to be able to regain some level of control, to know, what you can do, what you can't do, and I think we're still somewhat in limbo.
Bill was in law enforcement for 35 years. It's not the government they take issue with. It's the bureaucratic process they see as hindering their ability to live freely.
We're not asking for anything except for the county not to make it difficult for us to have something to enjoy. If you're not going to help us, just leave us alone. And that's what most people up here want. And there's nothing wrong with that. If they're not up here doing illegal activity and they want to be up here and they want to live in the woods and be away from people, and they're legally and they're not doing anything illegal, then people need to leave them alone. It's America.
The fact that 60% of the structures were unpermitted to Georgia means that there needs to be a change.
Something's wrong with the system. We can't put all the blame on one side. If you have a law in this country and 60% of the people are breaking that law on a regular basis, then I think you have to look at the law.
Schlahik did not express surprise at the number of illegal dwellings. In fact, he said that rural areas just tend to have fewer legal structures. Because all legal action by the planning department is complaint-driven, these numbers only emerged once planning compared their permit records with the CAL FIRE damage report. Georgia's visit did not convince her that an easy solution is near. To make the situation as fair as possible, Georgia argues that the community must come together to address the county as a unit.
Maybe it would be helpful if there were a community-based ad hoc committee or a task force established to look at all the issues from all sides and to make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors.
Bill and Georgia have yet to decide whether or not they will rebuild, and they still are not sure of the exact cost or time that rebuilding would require. For now, the planning department waits to see just how many applications they will receive. I'm Dana Fox Farrington.
Said I'd climb a mountain too with you. Said I'll climb a mountain.